Welcome to Module 4 of Leaders in the Leadership Process. This is our next to the last module, and so we are on the downhill stretch. So far, we started out by talking about individual leaders, each of you working on your journals and observing leadership around you in the form of good leadership, bad leadership, misleadership opportunities, etc. And now I would like to spend time during this and the next module really talking more about individual leaders within organizations. So as we add others to the mix in the situation, it can make a difference in how we lead. Culture is something that you've probably studied in other classes, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time delving into it, but I wanted to mention it in connection with leadership. Here's a definition. There are a number of them out there. As you can see, the one I chose talks about the aggregate of beliefs, attitudes, values, assumptions, and ways of thinking that is shared by members of an organization and taught to new members. And that last phrase is key because it's about embedding it in daily life, about passing it on. And if you think about workplace or organizations, the short definition I like to use is that culture really speaks to the way things are done around here. This is the way we do things here in our place of work. So each organization does have its very own unique culture. It's, as I mentioned, it's embedded throughout the organization. It typically permeates every aspect. It's based on their value system of the organization, often originating with the original founder. And it is based on the beliefs and philosophy of the organization. And it shows up in things like what we call artifacts and symbols of the culture. So there are tangible things that we can see that help us understand what the organization's culture is really like. So for instance, up on the screen, I have things like stories and myths. Sometimes you'll hear about stories of organizations that speak to what they value in that organization. Many of you have probably heard the story of Nordstrom's, which has become a legend, in which a customer tried to return a set of tires. As we know, Nordstrom's doesn't sell tires, but the salesperson took it back and refunded money, and that is something that's been passed down as legend throughout history of the organization. So it's just an example of passing down what we value in that organization. It also helps us understand how decisions are made. It speaks to things like the reward system, the promotion system, the type of people who are hired, etc. I often ask students, is a strong culture good or bad? And the answer that we typically get to is both. That a strong culture can be very advantageous because you have people looking towards the same goals and outcomes, working together in the same manner, on the same page with the same value system, and so it's much more efficient. On the other hand, it can lead to insular thinking, where anyone from the outside with different ideas that may not fit a preconceived idea within the culture might be rejected. And this can stunt the growth and development of an organization. So I think the most important thing here is that for a strong culture to be a really good culture, it needs to be an adaptive culture, which means that it embraces new ideas, innovation, and creative thinking. And that kind of strong culture will help an organization stave off some of the things that I have listed on the screen, like complacency, arrogance that our way is the best way, because as we all know, there's a competitor out there who's looking for an even better way. How does this fit in with leadership? Well, leaders are culture creators. They can help reinforce the culture. They're the chief role model for the organization. They're visible or should be visible, and even in large organizations, their actions, their communications all speak to what's important in the organization, and they become the role model for the others, as I mentioned, in the organization. There are certain things that they can do beyond that again are symbols, and I talked about tangible symbols like legends and stories, also things like architecture. Is the building warm, inviting in its architecture, or is it closed off? Is it dark? Is it cold? That kind of thing. So similarly, a leader's actions can symbolize what a company stands for and what its culture is about. So how they, the things they do that are out front and that others can see in terms of ceremonies and that kind of thing are really important. Also how the organization is structured. Are there a lot of managers? Or is it a hierarchy? Is it a flat organization? How does communication work? Is it very rigid? Is it very open? That sort of thing. And these types of actions can help an organization shape its culture and slightly change it as well. So how can we do that? How can we change or shape a culture? By adding new members that speak to the way we want the culture to become, and slowly removing those who are fighting against the change. If there are dysfunctional policies or practices, the leadership can work to change those and to make them much more functional and to work well with the organization and its objectives. It's important that everything be in alignment. So when, if, for instance, a leader is trying to create an adaptive culture and a creative culture, then we want to reward those behaviors. If you are trying to create an ethical culture, but you reward the salesperson who uses shady tactics but gets the most sales, then you can see where that's a problem, because people will tend to gravitate towards what's rewarded or punished rather than what you say is important. So actions do speak loudly and are very important. One type of culture that has become fairly popular, although not across all organizations, certainly, and is still in the minority, are what we call learning organizations. These are very organic, flat, adaptive organizations in which there is less management. Employees tend to be more empowered. They're given the tools, education, and training they need to do their jobs well and use their judgment in daily decision making. These type of organizations are highly adaptive. They expect and encourage their employees to keep looking for new and better ways to do things. Typically, ideas are often tend to bubble up from the bottom up towards the top, with the idea that those who are out in the trenches, closest to the customer or the action, have probably the best ideas in how to make them work better. So in order to make it work, the folks at the top have to be very, very supportive of this. And you'll notice the last thing I have written up here on the screen is that there is little fear of failure. It is probably more important to try and fail than to not try a new idea at all in learning organizations, because it's not about failing, it's about learning, and we learn as much from our mistakes and as we do from our successes. It's about continuous improvement. And you can see also that both we're looking for success not just in the short term but also in long term, and these improvements can help an organization become more competitive. So if we look side by side at a traditional organization and a learning organization on the right, you can see some of the differences. For instance, that the learning organization is an adaptive or changing environment. This means that it's encouraged and it becomes part of the culture. So that in today's world, when the environment is changing rapidly and the marketplace is changing and products are coming out faster, this product cycle is faster, this can be a benefit to organizations. The structure is flatter. It's a collaborative environment, decentralized decision making, many of the things that I just mentioned you'll find in a learning organization. And we typically have seen these in the technology industry, but we are beginning to see them in other industries as well, including a more traditional one like manufacturing. And again, here are some of these characteristics, but we just discussed. So how do we foster a learning organization as leaders? Well, we have to do some of these things like encourage learning and creative thinking and make a climate where this type of experimentation is encouraged. And as I mentioned before, your reward system, your promotional system needs to mirror what these goals in this type of organization. Systems thinking is something that I haven't really touched on yet, but again, this means that we're talking not just about my little world within the organization or my team, but how does this explode through the entire system? So you can see among the things here, I'll let you go ahead and take a look at those, that there are things as a leader that we can do to help move a culture to a more learning organization. One of the things that I would like to do is kind of tie up some things in terms of some smaller peripheral issues about leadership, now that we're talking about leaders within an organization. In a previous module, I talked about some of the newer contemporary leadership styles like transformational, authentic leadership, servant leadership, ethical leadership, all of which have a very ethical and other-centered, caring for others style to them. One type of leadership that we haven't really talked about, which is often lumped in as an aspect of or partner to transformational leadership, is transactional leadership. And this is something that I equate often to management duties as well. It's really an economic exchange, and by economic I don't necessarily mean monetary. Anything that has value for the parties involved can create an economic exchange. So in a transactional leadership role, it means that there are sometimes things where I, as a leader, might offer something in exchange for something that followers are doing. So for instance, your paycheck is a transactional, is an economic transaction. If you do a certain level of work, you come to work every day, you receive a paycheck in exchange for that. If you, perhaps another example might be if you meet sales goals, you would receive a certain bonus. And they're not always monetary, so it could be that you might be rewarded for your actions in helping a customer and heightened customer experience that was brought to someone's attention. So these are all transactional, and they're very necessary, and they tend to happen on more of a day-to-day basis, but they also need to reinforce the overall culture. And I bring it up here because I've mentioned in terms of culture the importance of rewards, punishments, and the alignment of all of these things within an organization. And in our organizations, one of the things that we have probably picked up over the term so far in all of the reading is the importance that trust plays. And underlying trust is this sense of ethics and a value system. Your Kouzes and Posner's book starts out in their very first practice that in order to model the way, you have to know what your values are. You have to have a value system. You have to be grounded in that, and you have to be and you want to learn to live that way and work that way. It's, again, how can you be an authentic leader if you don't know what you stand for? So ethics becomes important, and it really is a feeder into this idea of trust. Leadership is a relationship. It's a relational experience and influence process. And so we want to make sure that we highlight that, and I think that many of you would agree with that in your workplaces. Those that I find who talk about exemplary leadership often infer that trust is there. And I've mentioned here that trust is really an expectation that another person would not act opportunistically towards you. So trust requires a certain vulnerability and a willingness to take a risk. And if you look at the 5 dimensions that I've mentioned here for trust, they're very similar to some of the characteristics that Kouzes and Posner list for leadership traits that are valued by followers. So something to think about as you continue in your journals and reading about leadership. Here are some of the basic tenets of trust. And I think pretty common sense that mistrust drives out trust. It's really hard when trust is broken to regain it, although there are many who say absolutely it can be regained. It's a tough and long road, but and I do believe your textbooks have some portions in there where they've talked about that. But it's important to restore it if it exists, and this is a role that a leader can play in an organization. And when I speak of leaders in organization, I'm not just talking about the CEO. I'm talking about the leader of a team, a manufacturing line, a work group. There are many opportunities within organizations for leadership. And even if the organization itself lacks trust, your particular unit can be built on trust. And this leads into another conversation on leadership that we haven't talked a lot about, but there is a theme of it as you read through the material in the course, and that's really about mentoring and coaching. And the typical definition is we think of as in a work setting or a professional or career setting in which a senior employee or person helps sponsor or support a less experienced person. But we can also have mentoring and coaching going up as well as down, where newer, fresher idea, even younger employees come into an organization with less experience, and they're able to kind of reignite a passion that more experienced senior employees have had in the past. And they can also help bring in new information, technology, skills, that sort of thing. There's also a personal and developmental aspect to this, and help individuals grow and develop within themselves, not just as employees. And then along those lines, we can't really talk about coaching and mentoring and about leading others without talking about self-leadership. And it's something I just wanted to give a nod to before we move on, that it's important to be able to lead ourselves if we want to lead others. And this is where we learn to reflect on who we are, where we want to go, and control our behavior. So here's some examples of things that you can do, which is to focus on, if you want to be a leadership and engage in that, also focus on influence and less on control of those around you. So think about yourself as a leader and how you're going to develop that and how you develop into a leader. And this is one of the things that we've been doing in the journal, is to help you see opportunities all around you, which should help you see how you can jump in and create opportunities to lead as well. And then in terms of bringing this all together with culture and organizations, I did want to mention that one of the biggest challenges that leaders today have in organizations is working within larger virtual settings in which the person or people that you lead are not located physically in the same place, so that you can't walk down the hall, they can't see you smile. So you've eliminated some very rich channels of communication. And when you take away this face-to-face contact, it becomes more and more important that you as leaders and followers, for that matter, learn to communicate in a way that builds trust, and that you take time to make sure that your messages carry the right tone as well as content, so that people can understand where you're coming from. And this places a huge emphasis on written skills. When you think of the number of emails that people they receive and send on a daily basis. And I have to say, I don't know about you, but I think many of our managers need to go to email school, right? So that's what I have for you in Module 4. I am going to post something separately for you on the upcoming final assignment. It is one that was created by the faculty here at EOU to meet the objectives of the course. So it's the same assignment for all of the 462 classes, and but it's a little bit more detailed. So it's fairly well laid out on Canvas, but I will also post an announcement on it. As always, please don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I look forward to talking with you online and reading your journals. Thank you.